Hey, Moses learned a lot. He learned a lot when he was in the wilderness and solitude at Sinai, and before that amazing experience he had at the burning bush with God. There was a lot that God was building into Moses' life. But that was not the end of his learning. Moses continued to learn. And I think one reason why he was a great leader was that he was a man who was willing to learn. As he was learning, he was willing to make the changes. He was adaptable. He understood that there were situations and opportunity that demanded change. And leaders that don't make change are leaders that will never survive. In fact, the New Testament, when it looks to leaders who are unwilling to change, they fall into the category of the old wineskin. Moses learned some really pivotal lessons, I believe, that not only helped him in this moment to be able to guide in the present the children of Israel, but I believe that they were lessons that enabled him to be able to guide them successfully over the course of the next 40 years. And, maybe even in a way, because this was the advice of his father-in-law, Jethro, as Jethro was looking at all of the administrative responsibility that Moses had. And he said, man, you're going to kill yourself if you keep this pace up. Like, you can't be responsible for all of these people in every single one of their needs. Like, you really need to divide the people up, and you need to delegate leaders. And in a way, I do believe that as Moses yielded to this advice, not only did it enable him to be a good leader for the next 40 years, but I think it probably saved his life, or it saved his sanity. And it's hard as a leader to make changes. And I just want to say this real quickly, that I'm sure there were people that were in the congregation of the Israelites who were thinking, wait, changes? I don't like changes. Why are you dividing us up into groups? I don't like my leader. Why don't I have access to Moses? For sure, because some of us handle change better than others. And some of us don't like change at all. For sure, there were people. When you think about 2 million people in the desert, there were people that I'm sure pushed back against this change that Moses made. But Moses was a good leader. And the advice that he got from Jethro was so solid. Number one, teach the people what it is that God expects. And this is what we do every time we open up the scriptures. At the end of the day, what do we want to learn? We want to learn what's acceptable before the Lord. We want to know what it is that God desires from our lives. Number two, he says to Moses, you need to choose wise men, able men, men that walk in truth, men that are not given to covetousness. There's a standard, a solid, strong standard for leaders among God's people. And this is the testimony of the New Testament, that when Paul was talking about raising up elders or deacons, or in the early days of the church when they were selecting the first deacons to serve the widows, there were guidelines to be able to really choose wisely those individuals that would help lead the people of God. And then, finally, as he's instructing Moses, he tells him that he needs to be willing to be strong to make the changes that God is calling him to make. And that's exactly what Moses did. He made changes. And so I want to encourage you, in this study, to really consider the change that God is calling you to make in your life, and evaluate for yourself how you handle those changes. Do you have the tendency to really dig your heels in, or are you somebody that is adaptable? You yield to those changes that God desires to make in your life. I want to encourage you to consider as well, there are so many opportunities to serve here at Calvary Chapel, Las Vegas. And the truth is this, that the ministry is not about one person, it is about all of us serving the Lord together. And we've got great leaders in this church, and I do believe that God has given you a spiritual gift that he wants to stir up for his divine purposes. Hey, we're just starting a year out, and so right here, right now, before you leave this home group, I want you to discuss where it is that God might have you serve in Calvary Chapel, Las Vegas in 2020. And as you have this conversation and as you're praying, expect God to give you the wisdom and guidance that you need to follow him and to fulfill his will and purpose for your life. God bless you guys. Have a great study.